Landon Brooks. I'm with HeartLands Conservancy, and we are a nonprofit conservation agency, basically, in southwestern Illinois. Primarily, we are kind of starting to expand down to southern Illinois. But one of the things that we like to do is educational outreach, just to teach people about different subjects that basically are environmentally friendly, things that you can do in your own backyard. And so when we were talking about like our schedule for the year, composting was one of the subjects that we wanted to tackle because basically there's so much food left on the table, essentially, and you can reuse that food to create really good compost, which is a great soil for your garden. And Crystal came to mind because she does, well, all kinds of different things, really. But composting is something that you are a big advocate for, and you've been doing for a long time now, right? Yeah. So today we invited her to join us and talk about composting. She, like I said, does a variety of things. Flourish Farms. It's an organic farm over in the St. Louis area. That's primarily what you're known for. But she also does a lot of cool stuff. You should follow her on Facebook and all that. She does all kinds of just live videos. Yesterday, weren't you at the Missouri Botanical Garden?
Yeah.
I enjoyed that. It was nice because I haven't been able to get over there. And so I'm just seeing all the irises in bloom. That was stunning. And
it's gorgeous.
Yeah, and you do a bunch of
like, if you can.
I'm gonna try hopefully within the next few weeks to try to get those spring flowers in and see those. But you also do cooking segments with your daughter, who's amazing. And yeah, all kinds of different stuff. So with that said, I'll go ahead and I will share the screen with you so you can get going on your presentation. And then, like I said, everybody's free to ask questions as we go, and we'll just kind of do what we can here.
All right, can you see that okay?
Yep, beautifully.
All right, so as Landon mentioned, thank you for the introduction. I'm Crystal Stevens, and I co-founded a business with my husband called Flourish after farming for other organizations for almost a decade. So we moved out to Godfrey, Illinois, and managed 250. The farm was on 250 acres of protected land, but we managed 7 in vegetable and fruit and flower and herb production. And we ran a CSA for 250 members. And it was out of necessity that we started to compost, because we realized that when you till the soil, you're depleting it. And we didn't have a strong budget for buying compost in bags. So we decided let's just make our own. We got a few pallets at first and started 4 pallets next to one another, 4 pallet bins next to one another. And I'll show you pictures of those. And we became a drop-off location for people to bring their food scraps. And so we added leaf mulch, food scraps. It was really our CSA members. We had 250 subscribers to the farm. And so about half of them would deliver weekly a bucket of food scraps. So we built these very robust bins very quickly, and then mail ordered red wriggler worms, or they're also called red wiggler worms, from Uncle Jim's worm farm. And pretty soon we had this really robust compost system and vermicompost. And then we took that black gold that the worms created, was just essentially worm castings, and we fertilized all of our plants with that. And so every time we would plant something, we would put a scoop of the vermicompost in the hole to help replenish the microbes in the soil. And then we would sprinkle it over the beds and add organic matter. And we figured out ways to replenish the soil after tilling. And then we transitioned to no-till at Earth Dance Organic Farm School. We left La Vista Farm and went to Earth Dance Organic Farm School, where we practiced no-till. And then we decided to start our own business. And since the pandemic, my husband has actually had to go out and get a different job at another farm in Florissant, but I still run the farm here in Godfrey, Illinois. And we're on 10 acres, and I farm about 1.5 acres. So it's intensive, small scale, no-till. And our business includes a farm, a plant nursery, an apothecary, design and education. And I also co-founded the Tend and Flourish School of Botanicals, where we teach people about herbal medicine. So all things green and plants, I'm really passionate about, and I'm very grateful that I get to do this work. I'm doing what I love, and it's absolutely, I'm very grateful for it. I've written a few books about my passions, which are gardening and medicinal herbs, Grow, Create, Inspire, Worms at Work, and Your Edible Yard. And Worms at Work is all about composting and vermicomposting. It's basically a composting 101 book. And it goes into a lot of detail about the designs you can build and what to add to your compost. They're available at the public libraries all around St. Louis and Illinois, Alton, Godfrey. And then Your Edible Yard has over 100 color photos of what plants look like. So it shows you, what to plant where and what grows great in this region, and perennials to choose from. Lots of fun stuff. So,
hey, Crystal, what was that pink plant in that picture with you?
Oh yeah, that's amaranth.
Okay.
It's called red callaloo amaranth, and it's a beautiful plant. It's a great ornamental for flower arrangements. I mean, it's stunning in flower arrangements, but the seeds are actually edible, and the leaves are edible too. So it's a very dynamic plant. It grows really tall, it attracts pollinators. However, it does take over. So if, it's really only meant for like large scale stands of cut flowers. Or if you're doing grain production, you can grow fields of this and harvest the grain. It is very time consuming to harvest the grain, but it's just such a fun plant.
Cool. Well, it looks great against that blue building behind you.
Yeah. So those are the compost bins that we started with. So you can see they're built out of scrap material, nothing fancy. You don't have to have a big budget to do composting. All you need is a hammer and some nails or a screw gun and some reclaimed wood, and you can start out there. So that's what everybody dropped off at La Vista Farm. And then pretty soon, I mean, it didn't take long. It was about probably 2 months that it started producing the black gold. The worms are the surface feeders. And so they're surface dwellers, which means that they only survive on, or they only thrive on the surface where they're getting food. Other worms, such as earthworms, are like, they dig underground, they surface. You'll find a lot of earthworms in your garden already, but the composting worms are very unique in that they're decomposers. So they break down organic matter, and they turn that food scraps and turn all the junk into gold. They're like the little Rumpelstiltskins of worms. So when I talk about composting, I usually start with vermicomposting because I think it's the way to go. It gives you way more nutrient-rich soil, and it's also easier because you don't have to turn it as much. Now, Eric's not turning it. He's just like starting to harvest the castings there. So those are playing around with some of the worms. They didn't really like that too much. So vermiculture is worm farming. It's the use of worms to break down organic material. It's a simple way of turning table scraps into compost while hosting an environment for worm reproduction. Vermiculture operations range from small bins, like an indoor bin, to large-scale worm farms, which are called windrows. They're in long rows. And the vermicompost is essentially the worm poop. And worm castings, both of those same things are interchangeable. So vermicompost and the worm castings are worm poop. And you can see in this particular left photo, that's what we used to take to the Mother Earth news fairs and to schools and garden clubs to show people just how much we left that in there, no-till, let the worms do the magic, and they really, they ate what we fed them, and then they turned it all into black gold. And you can't really see the worms in there in the viewing tower because they don't like light. So they stay away from light. They kind of go where it's dark. There's another thing that you can do with compost tea most people think it's like the bottom of the bin of all the liquid you catch. That's called leachate. And I'll show you an example of that. But what you do with the worm castings is you actually put it in a burlap sack and let it sit in a bucket overnight or for 2 days. And then you actually have to get like a fish aquarium pump to aerate it, to produce oxygen. So it has to be oxygenated in order to kill the bad bacteria. And that's what you can water your plants with. If you just take the goo that falls from the compost bin and put that on your plants, it might have some harmful bacteria. All the chemists and the soil scientists and people say don't do that. But I do have a friend, Kathy Adam, who collects her leachate. She just shakes it in a milk jug with a gallon of water. She adds a little bit of leachate, maybe like 1 part leachate to 20 parts water in a gallon jug, and she shakes it, just gets her muscle power going, and she pours it on her plants, and she has 12-foot tall tomatoes. So, you can do that. It can be done, but the soil scientists are going to disagree. So as long as you're okay with experimentation. But you can always get some microbes, some good bacteria to fight off the bad bacteria. So the goal for composting is that you're mimicking, and I have some more slides to show this, but you're mimicking what happens in nature. So you're mimicking decomposition, you're mimicking that black gold that you see on the forest floor while creating this environment rich for bacteria, for fungi, for nematodes and protozoa, and for all these little creepy crawlies to have a little field day. I'm not sure what's happening here. I have a little animation that is supposed to pop up with, it looks like soil cracks, but it's not playing right now. I think. No, it's not playing. So when we talk about soil loss, that's a definite reason to start composting today, tomorrow, yesterday. Soil loss is really tragic in this society we live in. It takes 500 years for 1.5 centimeters of topsoil to form. 1.5 centimeters, it takes 500 years. And so we've lost a lot of our arable land due to deforestation, over tillage, building highways, freeways, roadways, subdivision, the suburbs, the urban areas. We've lost so much topsoil, and we keep losing it due to erosion, due to the lack of the soil staying together from over tillage, deforestation. There's so many tragedies that are happening with soil loss that it's up to people who are stewards of the earth, such as those at HeartLands Conservancy, or people who really care, to do their part to leave the soil somewhat intact when they leave, and to leave it better. I would hate to live in a world where our grandchildren couldn't garden because we've lost our topsoil. So the trick to do that is to mimic nature. Biomimicry is not really what we're doing here, but we are mimicking the nature cycles. So if you've ever gone out for a hike and you've got real close down to the earth and you scratch the surface, you'll see all that rich black gold that's on the forest floor because all the leaves are falling. The decomposers are working. There's a mycelial network, which is the fungal network underneath our feet, and they're helping to break down this organic matter. And there's all of these layers of detritus materials breaking down at various rates, and it's creating this really wonderful, nutrient-rich, dark black gold, which is what we have as our goal for our gardens. And no one ever had to go out and fertilize an old growth forest or any kind of forest. Nature is intelligent. Nature is this intelligent design system that we can mimic and say, hey, nice idea, and do it in our own gardens. So,
yeah, I think that, not to interrupt you, but the no-till form of gardening is so important. And I think that's like the next big thing, sort of, or is becoming a bigger thing in agriculture right now. Planting cover crops and all of that just helps so much. First of all, it puts more nitrates into the soil, Plus it holds it together. And you're in the winter, you're not going to be growing crops anyway. So why not cover it with a cover crop?
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, there's some good documentaries right now. There's The Need to Grow and Kiss the Ground. And write those down if you want. If you get anything out of tonight, watch those films because they're mind blowing and they really paint the true picture of what's happening. It's the information is presented by a team of scientists from around the world, soil scientists, water scientists, all kinds of people who are really genuinely concerned about the future of the earth. So,
And there's this idea, I think, in one of those, it's called like 60 harvests,
yeah,
in which they talk about if we continue to treat the soil how we do now, then agriculture as we know it only has 60 harvests left.
yeah, 60 years of harvest. That I started to cry when I heard that, and
Isn't that, I
I,
mean,
I
that's like probably not in my lifetime, but in my nieces and nephew, yeah, for sure.
right.
Yeah.
I don't know. We're still in our 30s, right? We could potentially see that day. So
I could maybe pull it off, but I don't know. I hope I don't actually, because
I'll just keep saving my seeds.
yeah.
And if you're still around, I'll share with you.
All right.
So ideal gardens are like a forest floor. They have, detritus materials. Our gardening mentor, his name is Jim Almond, and he lived in Salem, Missouri. He was in his 90s when we met him, and he would still work 8 hours volunteering in the gardens, the community garden. One time he took us back to his garden that he had been working years, doing all organic, all no-till for 50 years. He had been reading those Mother Earth News magazines and just going to town on all the different methods. And he said that you don't have good soil unless you can put your arm down and stick your hand all the way to your elbow into your soil. And so that means, 2 feet of soil just to press your hand right into. And sure enough, he showed us, he put his hand down and sure enough, it went all the way up to his elbow. So, and that's from years of him just layering organic matter, straw, leaf clippings, grass clippings, anything that he could get his hands on. He would get aged sawdust from neighboring lumber mills that did no treated, untreated untreated wood. And he would just layer it thick. And it was like sticking your hand into a compost pile. And that's how good his soil was. So ideal gardens are going to have just so much organic matter. Building or soil organic matter is one of the most beautiful things we could do for the earth. So mimic that. This is our wild child compost bin. I say wild child because it's got stuff growing out of it. We couldn't bear to, pluck those squash out of there. We got some really nice spaghetti squash out of that year. They were really big. But I always plant comfrey, that plant in the front left corner that looks like it's taken over. That's comfrey. That's a natural fertilizer. So it's also called a chop and drop plant, and it's a dynamic accumulator. So a dynamic accumulator means that it's taking minerals, nutrients, and vitamins from the soil, putting it into its leaves, making it bioavailable. And then when you chop it and drop it on a fruit tree or in pathways, it fertilizes the soil. So we would just grow it wild there, chop it, drop it in the compost, give it a couple of turns, and the worms would go to town on it. And it was just instant fertilizer for keeping, if we needed a little bit of green, if it got too dry, we would add some green, or if it got too brown, there's greens and browns. The browns are going to be the carbon materials like leaf litter, chip mulch, sticks, twigs. And then the greens are going to be the nitrogen. And the nitrogen is anything from food scraps to grass clippings to anything that's like living still. And the browns are the dead. So you have to have a pretty good ratio of 20 browns to 1 green. So that fluctuates. I don't follow that method. I just throw my stuff in the compost and engage it by what it looks like. As long as the worms are producing vermicompost, I know that it's doing good. So I just keep adding a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I'm not a soil scientist, so I don't do things by the book. Same when I'm cooking. I don't use recipes. I just a little dab of that, a little pinch of this. So I do the same with the compost. I know that's not the most accurate way, but
Hey,
you
I think that totally works. And that actually, that kind of goes with what one of the questions we had was, why are there several bins? Do different things go in each bin, or is that just to kind of help you stay organized, I guess?
So originally we put 4 bins because we knew we would need 4 because we had, 100 and something people dropping off their food scraps. So we were just like, let's just build as many as we can and they can just choose which one they go in. If you wanted to, you could have 3 side by side and have one be your daily compost. You could have one bin be like things that'll take a long time to break down, like those compostable cutlery, the compostable forks and plates and things like that, paper towel rolls, things that take a while to break down. And then the third one, you could add your chicken manure and things that need to be aged. So you could have a 1 year, 2 year, and 3 year pile. And I know some folks who do like 5 year pile and do human manure. I'm not going there. not going there. I don't know about you all, but that's
No.
not something I'd like to dabble in.
Yeah.
I am okay with composting toilets, and I guess that eventually has to go somewhere, but I won't ever use it on my vegetable beds.
No.
I know people who do it who are off the grid and they fertilize their flower beds with it. They're cut flower beds after it's aged 5 years. But how do you keep track of it? I just don't know. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we're
I've
not
seen
talking.
documentaries and I'm like, that's good for them, but like not practical or yeah.
Compost happens, right? um, so yeah, so that's kind of the bin breakdown. You can have one if you're not composting anything like the bones or things that take a while to break down or the compostable cutlery. Then you don't have to have more than one bin. And then we've found through years and years of trials and tribulations that healthy soil equals higher yields. It's the case every single time. So we consider compost to be a gardener's most valuable resource. See, I already went through those. So going back to that compost tea, it can be made into this nutrient-rich compost tea, which can be used to water the garden plants. It can be put on directly on beds, used to water seedlings. And then when we did use the vermicompost, we don't do it anymore because we don't have enough vermicompost. We're back down to a few bins, but we don't have that huge bin system anymore. We only provide our own kitchen scraps and our own leaf litter and grass clippings. So we're back down to gardener scale, not at the farm scale. But we would use 1 part vermicompost to 10 parts water and then fill up that burlap sack and then put it in a large Rubbermaid container or a 55-gallon drum. You could do it on a small scale with a potato sack, and do 5 gallons at a time. And you fill it with water and steep for a day to 1 week. That's really kind of pushing it. That's kind of getting it too close to spoilage, but 1 to 2 days is what we usually did. And you can just apply it when you're transplanting your veggies or fruits or water your fruit trees. So building healthy soil is the key to having optimal health in any garden setting. Building the soil's immune system to fight off unwanted pests or diseases. Now, the soil doesn't really have an immune system. That's just a word I like to describe it. It's pretty similar to us to give us those good microbes so that we can fight off the unwanted pests and diseases. And a permaculturalist, Aaron Jared, describes bacteria as the smallest but most abundant member of the soil food web, often feared but essential, whether directly or indirectly, for the survival of almost everything on the planet. So when we talk about the bacteria, there's actually, and I ran this quote by my sister-in-law, who's a soil scientist. She has her PhD. She went through years of study. And I read once that there's more microbes in 1 tablespoon of healthy soil than there are people on the planet. And I asked her about them. She's like, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We still don't know how many, but in 1 tablespoon of healthy soil, that's a little handful of healthy soil, there's more microbes than there are people on the planet. And there, how many billions of people? 8? Are we up to 8 billion yet? 9 billion?
I think it's something like that. At least 7.5 billion. Yeah, that's
I'm
great.
off by 1.5 billion. Sorry. So there's more than 7.5 billion microbes in a healthy tablespoon of soil. I always thought that was so fascinating. So quality soil is the most vital aspect of growing organically. And you ask any farmer and you ask them what their goals are, and they're going to say soil fertility if they run a farming business. So a healthy living soil is the key to a vigorous and healthy plants. And we got compost, vermicompost, and other organic soil additions that add nutrients to soil, improving plant vitality. If you're just starting out and you're just breaking ground on your garden, you can always get a soil test to see where you are, to see what your soil needs. And we went through Midwestern BioAg, and basically you send them, I think it's 6 tests per acre, 6 different samples per acre. So if you have an acre plot, you're going to have to send them, make a little grid and send them 6 samples, from 1 from each grid. I know it's confusing, but they'll work with you on it. And then they give you a printout report, you mail it in, they give you a printout report. They're going to try to sell you all these amendments, but really you just know what you need to do. And in our case, they've tried to sell us all these amendments, and we decided to do vermicompost. And what we did was it enhanced the soil by 100%. It was maybe not 100, but 40 at least. It enhanced our soil so much just by doing the vermicompost in the holes where we planted. We didn't even treat the whole field, but we did a test on 1 acre, and we put vermicompost in every single hole that we planted a plant, and it really significantly increased the fertility, and it made the soil look healthier, and just did a lot. So just the vermicompost alone can really significantly change your soil for the better. We've done side-by-sides also. So for tomatoes, peppers, any of the heavy feeders like the nightshades, we would do 2 identical rows of tomatoes, 1 with vermicompost and 1 without. And the ones with the vermicompost would double in size within maybe a month. They would double in size, and the ones without vermicompost would still be real leggy and kind of barely hanging on in the soil that we are planting in. So it significantly helps to increase soil health for sure, and plant health. I'm not sure why I have doubles here. Ideal garden soil is comprised of or composed of the ongoing layers of the following. So we've got small stems and twigs, fallen leaves, grass clippings, compost, worm castings, aged sawdust, living organisms, fruit and vegetable scraps, and other organic matter. And this is after it's been broken down, of course. So if you want to build, let's say you don't want to go out and buy soil, you want to just make some soil to put in some garden beds. Well, this is what you would start with in the beds and let it overwinter. And by the spring, you could have a really nice, healthy soil bed to work in that's virtually weed free. Unless you're adding grass clippings of weed seeds, like if your weeds have gone to seed and you're adding those grass clippings, you're going to have weed seeds. In order to get weed seeds to die, it has to reach, I believe, 130 degrees temperature Fahrenheit. And some people like hot composting, which that hot composting, you can't have worms in it, they die off. We call the worm composting the cold composting. hot composting is when you really want to kill those weed seeds. So you could have a hot composting pile and a cold composting pile, and your hot composting pile is going to get 150 degrees. And especially in the winter, it'll reach like sometimes 80 degrees in that core in the center of the compost bin. One winter day, it was 10 degrees out, and I went and measured the inside, and it was 80 degrees in the internal core of the compost bin, and those worms were still alive and kicking. So, it's up to you which version you want. You can do the hot composting or the cold composting. There's also bokashi composting, and I don't know enough about that yet. I'm still learning to speak on that, but there's very many methods of composting. And then if you plan to compost at home, be sure you have a composting system in place, so like a bin system. However, you don't really even need one. You could just have a pile. So, let's say you have a nice big backyard. In the back corner of your yard, you want to put a compost bin. Though you're going to get your steps in, because it's going to be, go into that compost pile every day gets to be old. So we have ours close to our house so that we can just, pop over. It does smell a little bit. It smells more earthy than anything. But if it ever starts to smell like funky, then you just add more browns. That means it has too many greens in it and it needs some brown material. And if you imagine if you've ever used a composting toilet, and I have a friend who has one inside her house, and as long as they keep sawdust on it after every use, it doesn't have an odor. So just know that, you might want to have like a pile of wood chips or a pile of leaf litter near your compost, so that if it does get stinky, you can just put the browns on it. And then simple compost bins for kitchen scraps. You can use a small trash can. So this is for internal or inside your house. If you have like a small trash can with a pedal lid, you can keep it in there. A 5-gallon bucket with a lid. We used to use the small trash can with the pedal to just put it in, and then we'd take it out every 2 days. But the pedal broke, so we we decided just to start using a 5-gallon bucket with a lid, and that works really well. Some people keep theirs in a freezer. I never have enough freezer space to do that. Like a ice cream gallon bucket, you could keep that in the freezer. We don't mind the smell. Sometimes it does attract fruit flies, but we put those little vinegar traps everywhere. And then we empty ours every 2 to 3 days. It really doesn't have that much of a smell. So the do's and don'ts of compost. Some people say don't compost dairy or meats, and that's mainly if you live in the city, and that's going to attract like rats or raccoons or rodents. You don't want a lot of that in your urban backyard, but we compost just about everything. We make sure that our dog can't get into it because we compost like chicken bones and things like that, but it really doesn't seem to bother anything. We welcome the raccoons and the wildlife. We're on 10 acres and we're kind of technically in their home, so we don't try to get rid of them. They kind of coexist with our animals, and yeah, they haven't bothered our chickens yet, so we got it kind of like a Taj Mahal in there. It's locked down pretty good. This is the worm bin that everybody thinks about when they think of a worm bin. I like these for classrooms and such, but I wouldn't really recommend doing an indoor worm bin unless you're going to do it 100% by the book. So, and what I mean by that is like oftentimes, and here's what I made a huge mistake about 8 years ago. I did a worm bin and I'm like, oh, I'll just go get some, soil from the forest floor to inoculate it and make all these microbes and make it a little happy. Well, what it did was it brought in all these pests. And so there was like all kinds of weird things crawling in and out of it all the time. So I had to go take it outside, just so you basically just do food scraps and bedding. Food scraps and shredded newspaper or shredded office paper works really well. And you don't add any soil. The worms will make the soil. So then it won't get all. That thing brought in fruit fly larvae. We had thousands of fruit flies on our ceiling. I would have to get out the vacuum cleaner, and it was madness. And then it also brought in flies. So I just had, that year was pretty intense trying to get rid of all those insects.
Right, that sounds like some stuff I would do too. Yeah. Like you always have, like sometimes you always have the best intentions, and then you're like, oh, well, if I would have thought that out, I would have realized. Yeah.
So we stopped doing indoor worm bins, even in the winter. We don't bring our worms in for the winter. We just pile straw bales out around their bin and put a sheet of plywood over it, and they usually stay alive all winter. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, if it's 80 degrees in the court, you think they probably just like hang out there like it's a resort all winter.
Yeah, they're in their little jacuzzi.
Yeah, basically. Hitting up Aspen.
So you can also, if you're an educator or if you wanted to do this, maybe you homeschool your kids, these are really fun. The plastic shoe bins, like the little Rubbermaid shoe bins, those don't work because they're not clear enough to see through it. But if you get an actual clear acrylic container, sometimes if your ice machine is broken and your freezer comes with like a little thing, this is what this one was. It was a container from a freezer that I just got. I'm like, that's going to make a great bin. So it definitely, this is not my photo, but I made one just like it, and I couldn't get a good enough photo on mine, so I used this one. But you basically just layer it with straw, some shredded paper at the bottom. You've got each time you feed the worms, you peel up that wet washcloth, and then you can sometimes wet the washcloth again to keep it moist or keep a spray bottle handy. But the kids love it. The kids absolutely love it. And again, don't bring anything from the outside in, and don't go digging worms from the backyard to put in your worm bin, because they're going to bring in other things and you don't want that. So buy your worms from Uncle Jim's Worm Farm, or some bait shops and tackle shops have red wriggler worms. All right. And I'll just show you, I know we're a little bit out of time almost, so I'll just go through these last slides real quick. So these are just some different things you can do to make a compost bin or a vermicompost bin. Wire fence cylinder, it's real affordable. You can close it off with zip ties. That one's going to be the easiest to move, and it's let's say you don't want your compost bin there anymore, you can pick it up and move it fairly easily. Whereas the pallet bins, they're going to be there unless you can get somebody to help you move it, because once that soil gets in there, they're going to be really hard to move. But that's just a basic cube bin. You can use wire to fasten it. It's best to get the ones that say HT, that means heat treated. And if you don't get those, then they're probably treated with formaldehyde, and you don't want formaldehyde in your worm bin. This one has a little trap door, same situation. You can just pry off with a pry bar the bottom 2 slats of wood, and then just stake 2 stakes in the ground a little bit away from the pallets, and then slot the wood back in so it's a trap door. So when you're ready to harvest, you just lift that up and you scoop, you make sure that your shovel can fit under there. You just scoop with your shovel and get all those worm castings out. And people are just like, well, I don't want to hurt the worms. The night before you go to harvest, you can put a hollowed out watermelon in the corner of your worm bin, and they're all going to retreat to that watermelon, and it'll look like a big bowl of spaghetti. And I guarantee they'll all like really flock to that. Just cover it up. They don't like to be exposed, so just kind of halfway bury it. And sure enough, you'll lift it up the next morning and they'll all be pulled together in that watermelon, getting some treats. So then you can harvest the worm castings without disturbing them. And then, you find an area in your yard that's shady. If you're doing a cold composting for the worms, they like to be in the shade and the sun. And it's going to be sunny because when the leaves fall, you'll still get some sunlight coming in the winter, so they won't be in total shade. This is another design that you could do. You could have a hole cut out and put some mesh there, and then put a grow box there. So they're going to come in and out of your grow box and fertilize it for you without you having to fertilize it. So that's a fun way to do it. And then, you know, you could take your rainwater, maybe you have rainwater catchment. You can wash your vegetables from your garden and then pour that bucket of water into the compost bin, the worm bin, and then collect the leachate, aerate it like Kathy Adams does, and then pour it on your garden plants. There's all kinds of worm towers you can buy. I wouldn't recommend anything like this unless you're doing a full-scale operation and selling worms and things like that. It's just too much trouble. It's best just to leave them outside where they belong and let them do their magic outside. I'm not really a fan of indoor worm composting anymore because I've seen just how many rodents it brings in, and you always have, or not rodents, pests, and you always have worm die-off in situations because maybe you go out of town for a week and you forget to spray your worms with water, and there's a lot of die-off. Unless it's a full-time business for you, I would recommend just having it outside. This is another way, if you don't want to have a compost bin, but you want to compost, you can have just a simple worm tower in your garden bed. So imagine your garden bed is about 2 feet deep. You could have a worm tower that reaches about 2 feet, and it's just a PVC pipe that you can poke holes in, and you compost right into the top of the tunnel and just put a lid on it so raccoons don't get in there. And basically you start with a handful of red wriggler worms, and then every day you just bring your food scraps out, and the worms are going to go in and out of that feeding tube, and they're going to keep going throughout the garden bed fertilizing so that you don't have to do anything. It's a closed loop system, and they're doing all the work for you. So they'll go to town for you.
It sounds like your worms are almost like your pets.
Yeah, I love them.
Yeah, you're like, I'm just gonna give them treats, or was like, you know, feed them down this tube and they'll come in.
I named all of them. Just kidding.
That's, I mean, it's cool though. I never even thought about worms as like just a part of your garden that you can work with and feed, really.
One of my colleagues at the Mother Earth News Fairs, he does livestock, and people are always like, what's the best and most lucrative or the best and the easiest livestock to tend to? And he's always like, worms. You know, he has chickens, goats, horses, cow, he has all kinds of things. And he said worms are the easiest and most lucrative because you can sell vermicompost for $25 a bag, you know, without having to do much work. So,
oh wow.
Yeah. And then, you know, if you have bunnies or keep bunnies, you could have them, you know, poop on top of the worm bin, and those worms are getting fed. Then you can stack functions and start your seedlings on top of that. All kinds of cool things to do. And just real quick, the worms can double their population every 90 days. So when it gets too crowded in there, you can just divide the worms and put them in a new bin. That's when you want to build a new bin for them. And, you know, or give half of them away, or you can even sell them to bait shops. I wouldn't recommend it because they're so valuable as composting worms. I always get sad when people use them as bait worms, but they do sell composting worms at some bait shops. So up to you. Those little cocoon, those are worm cocoons. So you can see a lot of them in this soil. And each one of those worm cocoons has 3 to 6 baby worms in it. So look at that spaghetti. They all came together after a heavy rain. So they're constantly doubling and tripling in population. But yeah, so that's that. I think we are out of time, and I want to open it up for Q&A.
Yeah, so we did have a few questions in here. We can go ahead and go through them real quick. What are the names of those documentaries again?
Kiss the Ground and The Need to Grow. The Need to Grow is really good. It has Rosario Dawson, who's a famous actress.
Let's see. Let's see. Somebody said, I think regenerative farming is needed. The ground is great. Our church, Kiss the Ground is great. Our church watched it and had a Zoom meeting to discuss. So that's
Wow.
nice that people also saw that.
It's wonderful.
How cold can it be for worms to live outside? So I think you kind of answered that. They can survive the winter as long as they have enough places to go.
Yep. You want to buy a few straw bales and stack them up around the bin, and then put a piece of plywood on top with something heavy like a cinder block, so that the raccoons, because the raccoons will try to get them for food in the winter. So you just want to have them well protected.
Okay.
And I check on them weekly in the winter just to make sure they're good.
And then are your compost piles on the ground or elevated?
They're on the ground. So the bottom of the compost is touching the grass.
Okay. And so do you have to feed your worms in the winter?
Yes, I just give them food scraps. So every time we fill our bucket of food scraps, I just take it out there and bury it for them so that they don't have to travel so far. So I just kind of scratch the surface, pour them down there, and then bury them again.
Nice. And then another participant said, I have great success with vermiculture inside. My favorite pets. I avoid onions and citrus for my indoor bins. Do you find that you can feed your worms in the outdoor bins these food scraps, like onions and citrus foods?
They avoid them. So anything hot, like garlic, onions, hot peppers, they avoid it. So I would say put that in a hot compost pile, or just pitch it, because the landfills need a little bit of organic material too to help break down stuff. So it is good to reduce the amount of food scraps that are going to the landfill in terms of the methane gas that it produces, and all the runoff and the spoilage. But we also, we do need to break down those. But you don't want to fire with too much of that.
I have a question. This is a personal question for me. So we talked about the soil structure and how it's really important. And basically, I moved to my house last year, and I bought a house and everything like that. And I had a garden at my old house, and I have to move it. So what I'm doing is I've covered my lawn because I don't want any grass at all. And I covered my lawn in cardboard, and I'm going to add like 4 to 6 inches of compost that I'm going to purchase because I haven't started my own yet, on top. And then I'm going to plant directly kind of into that. Do you think that that's a healthy, like sustainable way of going about starting a new garden without?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I would say do your 2 layers of cardboard, and you can get those big cardboard pieces at the bike shops and appliance stores. And
Yep, Lowe's. That's where I got them. I got them at
Great.
Lowe's. I was like, hey, do you have any refrigerator boxes?
Oh, perfect.
And they did, yeah. So I've been there. I made 3 trips so far. I'm gonna go back the next 2 days and get some more. But yeah, two layers of cardboard.
And then I would add at least an inch of chip mulch on top of the cardboard to form that mycelial network. That's going to help to speed up the process of decomposition eventually, and to provide the mycelium for a place to like latch onto. And then for your compost, we go through St. Louis Compost, and you can get a truckload delivered for like $200 and something. Or you can go get truckloads yourself if you have a truck for like $30. But the truckload that they bring you, it's like a dump truckload.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
They deliver it right to you.
And I think, yeah, I might end up going that route. Now the mycelium, you can actually buy like mycelium spores now, kind of at like some garden shops, right?
Yeah.
that was going to be my plan for that before I planted everything. I didn't think about the mulch layer on the bottom, but that actually makes a lot of sense. But
Yeah, and
so
then when you do go to plant into it, I would just, wherever you're going to plant, let the hose run for about a minute so that it wets the cardboard enough to dig a hole. Because otherwise it's going to be really hard to dig through 2 layers deep of cardboard. Or you can get a sharp serrated knife and
okay.
kind of just unbury the cardboard, go in and cut it, and then plant. But I would definitely plant through the cardboard if you're planting shrubs or, large things that need a lot of root space, like any root crops need to go down there, and tomatoes need a very strong root system.
Yeah, so I'm going to be planting a lot of prairie plants, like
Oh, nice.
coneflower, prairie dock, those kind of things.
Oh, perfect.
And oh gosh, I call it mustache grass, prairie dropseed and stuff. So, and those have like really strong roots. So I thought I could just plant it and not cut any holes in, and those roots within a short period of time will probably break through on their own. Do you think?
Most likely.
I need the prairie kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's what I was hoping for. Oh, looks like we have a couple more questions coming in. Okay. If you put plants, weeds, in the bin that have roots on them, will they grow in the bin or will they eventually die?
As long as they're buried, they'll probably die. If you put them on the surface, they might root, but they'll be real easy to pull out.
Okay. This person said, I have a black plastic manufactured compost bin. I've had it for a while. Have been putting in vegetable waste. I do not have any worms in it. I really don't know if it's been very successful. Would it be a cold or a warm compost that I'm doing? Should I purchase worms? Where is the best place for me to get them?
For those tumblers, you don't want to tumble the worms if it's a tumbler one. If it's just a stationary bin, you can keep worms in it. They probably will try to get out because it might get too hot, especially if it's black and absorbing the sun, it might get too hot. So I would say just go ahead and do hot composting in there just to be on the safe side. You wouldn't want to purchase 1,000 worms and then have them die on you, because that's always sad.
And then also, do I have to turn it? Yes, you do need to turn it, and you need to add water from time to time too. That just helps everything kind of break down. So for that, if it's a stationary one, you can get those like kind of it's not quite a pitchfork, but a smaller kind of pitchfork, and kind of get in there and stir it up.
Yeah.
I have one of those too, and that's kind of what I do with it.
Nice.
Where do we find safe sawdust to use in our area?
Basically, anybody who has a home sawmill. So if you look around for people who, make those big, beautiful pieces for wooden tables, they're going to be sawing all day. They probably have a sawmill. You can call them and see if they would mind if you came and pick up buckets of sawmill. But in terms of like, if you're a carpenter and you're sawing wood from Lowe's or Home Depot, you wouldn't want to use that because it's probably treated, unless you're specifically using untreated lumber. And basically the treated stuff may kill the worms. Who knows what's in it? There's probably formaldehyde and preservatives and chemicals to prevent it from rotting. So, I would err on the side of caution. You could put it in your hot compost, but you might kill some microbes. Just don't put it in the worm compost.
There was one more comment. I think that's about what we have time for. Yeah, it's right at 7 o'clock. Food in the landfill biodegrades without oxygen, which causes them to release methane, which is way worse than CO2 for the earth. So I think that's coming from talking about putting an onion or something in a landfill. But I still, it's going to break down regardless, right? So,
but it is dangerous. Like it could cause lots of, off-gassing. But there's lots of articles that say we still do need some food scraps to help break down materials. But it's good to, to take most of the food scraps and compost most of the food scraps. But yes, it is dangerous, and there's actually the Westlake landfill that was on fire for a long time in the St. Louis area. And I'm not sure if it's due to the methane and the heat that those microbes are causing, but it is absolutely dangerous. Thank you for pointing that out.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts with compost. Just like there's a lot of moving parts with earth. I mean, I think that's what we can do is just be the best stewards of the land that we can be, and learn over time from trial and error. I think that's I like hearing your story about that. Of like, well, I wanted to do this and I tried to do that, and like, here's what I've learned now. I think that kind of perspective is so valuable, because that's how I learn. You know, I learn all my lessons the hard way, it seems like. So I'm glad to hear from you firsthand, and thank you very much for the personal advice on my cardboard situation. But yeah, when I got to thinking about it, I didn't want to disrupt the soil structure. I had grass on it before, and I thought this would be a really cool way just to add more nutrients into my ground. And basically that's what composting is all about. It looks like we've answered all of the questions. Do you have any other comments or anything, Crystal?
I appreciate everybody joining us this evening, and my website is growcreateinspire.com or flourishfarmstead.com. And if you wanted to learn more about the herb school here in the Midwest, we meet in Godfrey, Illinois. It is tendandflourishschool.com. So that's all about learning how to make your own herbal medicines, how to grow medicinal gardens, and make things like salves and tinctures and tea blends and syrups, things like that from the wild, and from cultivated ecologies. So thank you all.
Are you going to be, are you doing any in-person events anytime in the near future? I know everybody's kind of starting to get back to normal. So
yeah, we do our herb school classes in person with masks 6 feet apart here at the farm. It's all outdoors. So
okay.
We do those. I'm thinking about leading a foraging walk here pretty soon, but I haven't set a date yet. So I should have done it in the spring, but I'm trying to wait to see where I can host it.
Yeah. All right, perfect. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to seeing more of your stuff online, and then hopefully in person.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Well, we will end it here. If you want to watch this again, you can see it on our YouTube channel. I'll have it up probably tomorrow afternoon. So, all right.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you.